All right. Welcome everybody to our Book of Enoch, chapter 2 to 7, Holy Spirit-led Bible study. So here we get a little bit more into the Watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim. All right. So just a general outline of Enoch. So chapter 1, which we talked about last week, Enoch has given a vision for our generation. So our generation, the one that's living in the time of tribulation, where he sees the Holy One, Jesus, appearing in the heavens, bringing judgment upon the wicked and ungodly. And it looks like he was seeing a vision of the day of the Lord. And he brings peace and blessing upon the righteous and the elect. Chapter 2 to 5a is Enoch has shown various aspects of the creation, including the luminaries, the seasons, the water cycles, trees, the sun, all with the emphasis on how they are steadfast and do as God commands. And then chapter 5b, Enoch rebukes the sinners and godless who do not follow God's commands and speaks of wisdom, joy, and peace for the elect. And chapter 6 to 7 we'll be getting to today, the fallen angels lust after human women who bear giants, Nephilim, that consumed men's acquisitions initially and eventually the men themselves. I'll just have everyone turn their mics to mute and we'll just listen to Christopher Glynn here just narrate their chapter 2 to 5a, I believe.
Chapter 2. Observe ye everything that takes place in the heaven, how they do not change their orbits, and the luminaries which are in the heaven, how they all rise and set in order, each in its season, and transgress not against their appointed order. Behold ye the earth, and give heed to the things which take place upon it, from first to last, how steadfast they are, how none of the things upon earth change, but all the works of God appear to you. Behold the summer and the winter, how the whole earth is filled with water, and clouds and dew and rain lie upon it. Chapter 3. Observe and see how in the winter all the trees seem as though they had withered and shed all their leaves, except 14 trees which do not lose their foliage, but retain the old foliage from 2 to 3 years, till the new comes. Chapter 4. And again observe ye the days of summer, how the sun is above the earth over against it, and you seek shade and shelter by reason of the heat of the sun. And the earth also burns with growing heat, and so you cannot tread on the earth, or on a rock, by reason of its heat. Chapter 5. Observe ye how the trees cover themselves with green leaves and bear fruit. Wherefore give ye heed and know with regard to all his works, and recognize how he that liveth for ever hath made them so. And all his works go on thus from year to year for ever, and all the tasks which they accomplish for him, and their tasks change not, but according as God hath ordained, so is it done. And behold how the sea and the rivers in like manner accomplish and change not their tasks from his commandments.
Chapter 2. So he talks about how observe everything that takes place in the heaven, how they do not change their orbits. And when you look at time-lapse photography of star trails, what you'll notice is they all go around Polaris. So basically what they're doing here is they're leaving their camera on overnight, doing a very slow exposure. And what you'll see here is all the stars, they progress in these concentric circles, all around the North Star Polaris. And this is confirmation that the Earth isn't moving, that the stars around it are what's moving. And they're all moving around the star Polaris. And this has been the same look for the last several thousands of years. So the angels tell Enoch to look at the luminaries, the stars, and how they transgress not their appointed course. So they stay on their same course. And if the Earth was moving, we'd actually see different star trails. We'd see it not do this concentric pattern. If we're going through space, we should see more lines rather than circles around a central point. Um, the main idea, though, is that we're seeing the same stars that Enoch saw, and that's what they're saying here is observe the luminaries. They do not change their orbits. They rise and set in order, each in its season, so they follow their appointed course. Um, and this should have, for the wise, we should understand, what that means, um, and what we should believe or not believe about the universe. Again, we're taught something from Mystery Babylon, and the question is what do we believe? Do we believe what it says in God's word, the words that God gave to us through various prophets like Enoch, or do we believe what Mystery Babylon is trying to tell us? We'll discuss more about the true nature of the universe later in our Enoch Bible study. We've talked about it before, and if you want to sort of recap, or if you want to just sort of see that in advance, if you haven't heard this before, you can check out our Revelation 7a and our chapter 8b studies. Chapter 8b typically gets more into the stars and what they really are the angels. What does the Bible say? And again, if what we're talking about isn't making a lot of sense, you might want to look into those first before moving on. Now, verse 1 to 2, just like ants cannot fully understand the ways of humans, we cannot fully understand the ways of angels. So, does it make sense for us to see angels going in circles in the sky over, hours and hours and hours, and obviously days, weeks, months, years? Does that make sense? And like we can't understand the ways of ants, couldn't understand the ways of humans, we can't understand the ways of angels. Now, by the way, there are stars that do not follow their appointed order, and these are called planets in Greek, or planetes, wandering stars. And in a lot of mythologies, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, a lot of these wandering stars, these planets, serve as the basis of pagan gods and goddesses. And again, just something to think about. A lot of times we want to dismiss a lot of Sumerian, Greek, Egyptian, Roman culture. We want to dismiss it as myth. And, there's a reason these people believe the things they believe and been passed on from their ancestors. So even though the world wants to call it myth, maybe we should just sort of pay attention, see where do these ideas come from? How did they originate? Verse 3. So it said there in the text, how none of the things upon the earth change. Now, this is a direct contradiction to what Mystery Babylon kind of proposes through notions like Copernicus's moving Earth, Lyell's gradualism, where the Earth is constantly changing over time, and Darwin's evolution, which is additions to the genome kind of over the years, causing changes in phenotypes and what people look like and appear like, or creatures, I should say. And again, these all oppose what God is saying here, that nothing on the earth changes. We go through cycles, but nothing changes. Just like we have seasons, the recurring cycle of seasons and the ever-renewing water cycle are just further examples of the steadfastness of God's creation. So the point that God is really trying to drive home in these first, the second chapter here of Enoch, is this steadfastness, this cycling, this nothing really changes. It all kind of stays the same upon the earth. And there's a reason they're really driving this point home, which we'll see shortly. So again, this theme of order is constantly present in the creation. God's creation is full of order. Chapter 3, observe and see how in the winter all the trees seem as though they had withered and shed all their leaves, except 14 trees which do not lose their foliage but retain the old foliage from 2 to 3 years till the new comes. So in the Bible, trees can be said to represent people. Mark 8:24 says, I see trees as men walking. This is the blind man that was speaking. And fruit would represent our spiritual output, and you shall know them by their fruit. So you'll know what people are like based on what they're putting out. And then the leaves actually represent our trust and our truth. Here's a scripture from Jeremiah 17:7. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose trust is the Lord. For he will be like a tree, so men are like trees, planted by the water, that extends its roots by a stream, and will not fear when the heat comes, but its leaves will be green, and it will not be anxious in a year of drought, nor cease to yield fruit. Meaning that when we have trust in God, we'll continue to have our leaves. They'll continue to remain. And if things go bad or sour, we won't change what we believe or we won't change what we know to be true. Um, Now, what we're seeing here is two types of trees, ones that wither and lose their leaves. So there's some people who, when they're faced with any distress or peril or trouble, they'll lose their trust in God. They'll lose their ability to want truth and promote truth. Um, and this is kind of like a tree losing its leaves. But there's other trees that maintain their foliage, and see here, you can see foliage for 2 to 3 seasons. These are ones that will stay in truth, stay in trust. They will not change. And so that's what these trees are examples of, these two types of different trees. In Matthew 21, we see Jesus cursing a fig tree. We'll just read that passage here. Early in the morning, as Jesus was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves, no fruit. Then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." Immediately the tree withered. Now, a lot of people know that he's speaking about the children of Israel at that moment, the Hebrews. And they were presented truth. God sent them his prophets. He sent them Jesus. They had this truth. They had access to this truth, but they never bore fruit. They never changed. They rejected Jesus. They rejected the prophets. So they never produced fruit. And so Jesus was showing that they had withered. And he was making room for, new believers that believed in him. Here's what Jesus says. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit. For without me, ye can do nothing. And so that's just what I said there, is that we need Jesus. We need Jesus he is the one that gives us the fruit, that makes us produce fruit, makes us fruitful. But he's also the one that we put our trust in. And because of that, he gives us truth, and that allows us to go on. So again, we have to maintain our trust and truth in God and what he says. And God says, I'll send you my son for your salvation. We have to trust that. Now, interestingly, the book of Enoch is exactly correct when it says there are 14 trees that do not lose their foliage in the winter. So this is from a website, Owen John James, and you can check it out there. But they list the exact 14 trees that do not lose their foliage in the winter. And so Enoch is correct in that statement. So some of these trees are the holly, palm and coconut trees, redwood trees, tree ferns, oak trees. These are magnolias. This is an olive tree, and then pine, spruce, cedar. They mentioned tatara, yew. But yes, 14 of these trees that do not lose their foliage in the winter. Oops. Okay. So chapter 4, and again observe ye the days of summer, and how the sun is above the earth and against it. So the sun is above the earth, is what Enoch says. And you seek shade and shelter by reason of the heat of the sun, and the earth also burns with growing heat. And so you cannot tread on the earth or on a rock by reason of its heat. So some of you might be new to this model, but this is the model of the non-moving earth. And what you'll notice is the sun, just like Enoch says, sits over the center of the earth. And what actually happens is during the summer months, the sun will move closer to the center over the Tropic of Cancer. And that's why you'll see in what we've been classically told of the northern hemispheres, but more is towards the center of the earth, you'll see more heat in those summer months. And then in the winter months, it'll go out towards more of the periphery. And so in what we've been told is the southern hemisphere, that starts heating up in our winter months and their summer months. So again, when that sun is kind of closer over the center, this explains why our days are longer and warmer, because the sun is closer. It's been closer the whole time, and it's kind of staying in that tight circle. Days get longer and colder, shorter and colder as we get to where's the winter months, just because it's going towards the outer periphery there. Now, again, when you know these things and you read the book of Enoch, it really defends you against the lies of Mystery Babylon. And this is the biggest reason why the book of Enoch is suppressed. So Mystery Babylon knew that if the book of Enoch's out there, people aren't going to buy a lot of their lies. And so they had to really, really suppress this book. And as we talked about in our study last time, the book was heavily suppressed. It was virtually hunted down, sought for, and removed, right? It was only managed to be preserved by the Ethiopians and later found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Sadly, even most of the church pastors are fooled about the Book of Enoch. And again, they kind of just promote what they've been taught in seminary. They don't really seek to learn for themselves. And the book does have tons of useful information in it, and is actually critical for understanding the 66 books of the Bible we have now fully. There's things in there that you wouldn't know unless you're reading the book. They talk about the sun, and again, just little we talked about it in our other study, Revelation 7a and 8b, like I showed. But just one little thing is corpuscular rays. You'll see that we've taught this in physics, is that light will always go back to its source. And we know that, you can see here, there's corpuscular rays even above the clouds, below the clouds. They all point to the sun, which is close. It's not 93 million miles away. It's close. And again, just more corpuscular rays. We know the sun is close because of its heat. So just think for a second, if something 93 million miles away, if we're feeling that, even if that makes sense, because just a slight movement to the shade and that heat goes away instantly. It doesn't make a lot of sense that it's 93 million miles away. It's closer than we're told. Okay, chapter 5. Observe ye how the trees cover themselves with green leaves and bear fruit. Wherefore give ye heed and know with regard to all his works, and recognize how he that liveth forever made them so. And all his work go on thus from year to year forever, and all the tasks which they accomplish for him. And their tasks change not, but according as God hath ordained, so is it done. And behold how the sea and the rivers in like manner accomplish and change not their tasks from his commandments. So verse 1 to 3 here, there is a return here to some of the topics and themes mentioned earlier, notably trees bearing leaves and fruit, understanding God's works, and how they cycle from year to year, and how even the seas and rivers change not their tasks. Now, if you'll recall from our studies of Daniel and Revelation, the Holy Spirit uses chiasms, which are literary structures of build-up, central axis, and mirror to drive home a point. So if you'll remember, we've kind of seen this kind of diagram here throughout our Revelation and Daniel studies, but this is just basically how a lot of these scriptures are set up. And Enoch 1 to 5 has a similar chiastic structure, which we'll just quickly review. Chapter 1 is Enoch describing the lot of the elect and righteous versus the wicked and ungodly. That was last week, or last time. God's judgment on the earth is coming. Chapter 2, today, Enoch is told that everything on the earth follows their appointed order. They are steadfast and do not change. Chapter 2, verse 3 to chapter 5, verse 1, which we just talked about here. Enoch is given specific examples of seasons, leaves, the water cycle, the sun, and then trees, leaves, years, and water again. And then the mirror to chapter 2, 1, 2 is Enoch 5, 2, 3. Enoch is again told the tasks God sets forth and do not change and are done according to how God has ordained. And then the last section here we'll talk about in a second. Enoch describes the lot of the steadfast and righteous versus the sinners and godless. The righteous will have peace and inherit the earth. So that's kind of parallel to chapter 1. So again, we sort of see this mirrored structure again in the book of Enoch. The central axis being that the creation is evidence of God and his constant, unchanging nature. So, this part just around that talks about how God's creation is constant, and then we see it. We see it in their description of the seasons, the leaves, the water cycle, the trees. All this stuff is really pointing to God's consistency. Now, there's another part where they talk about the creation. This is in Romans 1, 17 to 22. I'll just read it out here. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. So I've said this before, anytime you see the English word faith, pisteuo in Greek, in the Bible, replace it with the word trust. So the just shall live by trust. Righteousness is trusting God. That's righteousness. Abraham trusted God and it was accounted to him as righteousness. Verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So what it's saying is, just like in Enoch, God makes himself known through his creation. There is an order to things. Everything is meant to follow God and recognize his sovereignty and power. So God makes it known. He makes the truth known. He makes men see how constant he is, how much in order he is. And so when we see that, we should know God's nature. And we're all meant to follow God, follow his orders, and recognize his sovereignty and power. That's how we were built. Verse 21, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. So verse 21 to 22 here, those that would disregard God, the ungodly, or go their own way, which is the unrighteous. Sinners means to go the way God wants. Waywardness or sin is kind of going our own way, and that's considered unrighteousness. They do not glorify God, even though they know they should, or they're not thankful. So they're not thankful either, I should say. So these are people that don't glorify God. They're not thankful. And what happens to them is they become vain in their imagination, and their foolish heart is darkened. So because of this, the atheists and agnostics of the world become vain in their imaginations, their foolish hearts become darkened, and claiming wisdom, they become fools. So just think of all the Mystery Babylon scientists that will deny God, and they become fools. They push these foolish theories. They get everyone to try and believe their foolish theories, but they're wrong. They really go against what science actually does tell us. Science is observation. And what we observe is actually not consistent with what Mystery Babylon tells us. Mystery Babylon is kind of like a religion unto itself. It's scientism is the other way to think of it. And they kind of tell you how things are, but the observation, when you really look into it, don't fit with what they're trying to tell you. So the chiastic structure of Enoch 1 to 5 should be just another reassurance that the book of Enoch is Holy Spirit inspired scripture. So when you see these evidence of chiasms all throughout Revelation and Daniel, and you see it in Enoch, it just kind of shows it's the Holy Spirit's kind of fingerprints that just, hey, this is something scriptural. This is something Holy Spirit inspired. Now, again, like Enoch 1:2 says, it was meant for our generation. It is meant to defy the lies of Mystery Babylon that are being promoted today, which the majority of the earth right now believes. Now, note how chapter 5, verse 4 to 9 parallels chapter 1 on the theme of the lot of the wicked and the righteous. So I just kind of made that point again. There's a parallel there. Chapter 1 last time talked about that. And chapter 5, 4 to 9, which we'll hear right now, says the same thing.
But ye have not been steadfast, nor done the commandments of the Lord. But ye have turned away and spoken proud and hard words with your impure mouths against his greatness. O ye hard-hearted, ye shall find no peace. Therefore shall ye execrate your days, and the years of your life shall perish, and the years of your destruction shall be multiplied in eternal execration, and ye shall find no mercy. In those days ye shall make your names an eternal execration unto all the righteous, and by you shall all who curse, curse, and all the sinners and godless shall imprecate by you. And for you, the godless, there shall be a curse. And all the elect shall rejoice, and there shall be forgiveness of sins, and every mercy and peace and forbearance. there shall be salvation unto them, a goodly light. And for all you sinners there shall be no salvation, and on you all shall abide a curse. But for the elect there shall be light and joy and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. And then there shall be bestowed upon the elect wisdom, and they shall all live and never again sin, either through ungodliness or through pride. But they who are wise shall be humble, and they shall not again transgress, nor shall they sin all the days of their life, nor shall they die of the divine anger or wrath, but they shall complete the number of the days of their life. And their lives shall be increased in peace, and the years of their joy shall be multiplied in eternal gladness and peace, all the days of their life.
So yeah, let's just recap that. So we're on Enoch chapter 5 here. And so in verses 2 to 3, we saw the emphasis on staying on task with what God has ordained. And now that we're into verse 4, the angels are speaking to those that do not stay steadfast and disobey God's commands. These are rebellious and speak proud words against God's greatness. So it's the angels that are talking now, and it's talking to those that are not steadfast and that disobey God's commands. And so they talk about them being rebellious and speaking proud words against God's greatness. The word execrate there means loathe, so you'll dislike your days. Their years are shortened, the years of your life shall perish. And the years they spend in destruction, they shall loathe even more. So after they've finished their earthly life, even the days of their destruction, they'll loathe as well. And they shall find no mercy. Now, this all sounds pretty harsh, but do note that Jesus is still unknown at the time of Enoch. He is mentioned later in the book of Enoch, but at this time, Jesus hasn't been on earth. This is still around Enoch's time that Enoch's giving these prophecies. In those days, verse 6. So even their names will be a curse unto all the righteous. So the righteous will use their names as a curse. And by these people that are like this, the world will curse. All the sinners and godless, shall imprecate by you, shall curse by these people. And for you, the godless, there shall be a curse. So for the godless, there will be a curse. Now, this part here, 6D, and all the blank shall rejoice. The missing word there is righteous. And we can see this in other versions of Enoch. If you want, there's a parallel, the book of Enoch.info, and it just has parallel versions of Enoch. So you can kind of see there's the R.H. Charles version, which we're using. There's the Richard Lawrence version, and there's another version as well. So you have three of them side by side, and it kind of helps just kind of make sense of some things if the words are a bit confusing. Now, 6E there, and there shall be forgiveness of sin. So, we all sin, but we are told that forgiveness of sin is possible. Now, the book of Enoch interestingly reinforces God's mercy. So a lot of times people will say that, how come in the Old Testament God seems so angry and didn't have forgiveness, and in the New Testament suddenly he does? That's not true. He actually does show his mercy throughout the Old Testament, Old Covenant. And the book of Enoch here is just showing that there shall be forgiveness of sins and every mercy and peace and forbearance. So that's just a reminder that, no, God is good and he does forgive and he has grace. They talk about here choosing righteousness, which is trusting God, leads to salvation and peace. So there shall be salvation, whereas for sinners there will be no salvation, but on them shall abide a curse. 7a, but for the elect there shall be light, joy, and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. And this is where in the book of Matthew, Jesus quotes the line, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." So the elect are meek, they're humble. They'll have light, joy, and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. Now, when do the elect inherit the earth? This would be the millennium. And you can go back to our 20A Bible study just to learn about the millennium, what happens during the millennium. I believe it's an extra 1,000 years. During that time, Satan is bound, his demons are bound. People will know how life is without those around, without those influencing people. And I do believe that's going to be an opportunity to be filled with much, much more wisdom and joy and peace during that time. Verse 8, they will be given wisdom and the Zoe spiritual life. So we talked about that in the millennium, how people are meant to obtain this spiritual life, the Zoe life, they call it. And it's an eternal, divine kind of life that only God can give. And this is what Jesus refers to as finding life, right? So even though people will physically die, they will find life, Zoe life. People will no longer sin because their wisdom will bring humility. So it kind of all goes together, humility, wisdom, peace, joy, all those things are associated with each other. And verse 9, nor shall they die of divine anger or wrath. So we talked about spiritual life, which is Zoe. And again, these are all talked about in Revelation chapter 20a there. But we talk about spiritual death. We talk about destruction, cease to exist, the lake of fire. And that's spiritual death. That's permanent. So again, it's reinforced, those statements here in the book of Enoch. You know, you can almost think of the book of Enoch here talking about the millennium and talking about the ultimate judgment as well, the great white throne judgment. And so again, Enoch is touching on all of this. And, you know, sometimes if we're reading just the 66 books of the Bible alone, we kind of miss these things. But when you know the book of Enoch, you'll know that these times are accounted for. And even when we got to some of the prophetic verses in Enoch into the, you know, chapters 91, 93, we'll see that again where there is a lot to suggest a millennium, a literal millennium of 1,000 years. This is chapters 6 and 7.
The fall of the angels, the demoralization of mankind, the intercession of the angels on behalf of mankind, the dooms pronounced by God on the angels, the Messianic kingdom. Chapter 6. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semjazer, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then sware they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And there were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they'd sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders: Semiazaz, their leader, Arichabah, Ramael, Kokabeel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Asael, Amaros, Batarel, Ananel, Zachiel, Samsapiel, Satarel, Turel, Jomjael, Sariel. These are their chiefs of tens. Chapter 7. And all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, each chose for himself one, and they began to go in unto them and defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones.
So here we get to the watchers, these angels. So here we have another account besides the Genesis 6 account, which we're familiar with, of the children of the heaven, which are the angels, lusting after the daughters of men. Now, Enoch makes it very clear that they are angels, and not the sons of Cain, as some incorrectly preach. So most pastors that have been to seminary, they will have heard that the sons of God here are the sons of Seth for some reason, and they're not told that they're angels. And they go around propagating those lies in church, unfortunately. And it's just really sad. If they opened up the book of Enoch, they would see that those are definitely not the sons of Seth. The phrase sons of God, which is Bena Ha Elohim in Hebrew, also appears in Job. So we actually see that exact same phrasing in the book of Job. And in those verses, they definitely refer to angels. They're talking about the angels meeting with God, and they're called the sons of God, Bena Ha Elohim. And again, it's really clear that this reference here is to angels. The Book of Jubilees, which is also found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, also confirms that these are angels. So this is from the Book of Jubilees. The angels of God marry the daughters of men, chapter 5, verse 1. And it came to pass when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the angels of God saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon, and that they took themselves wives of all whom they chose. And they bare unto them sons, and they were giants. So very clear there that the sons of God reference here in Genesis is about these angels. Michael Heiser, in his Supernatural Seminar, spoke of 3 rebellions against God. So I highly recommend this series. And he just talks about these 3 rebellions that happened. The first rebellion was in the Garden of Eden. This was the serpent. The second rebellion is this event here, which happened at Mount Hermon. And the third rebellion happened at the Tower of Babel. That was Nimrod building the Tower of Babel as a rebellion against God, getting the people of the earth to rebel against him. There is a 4th rebellion coming, and what's his name? Klaus Schwab talks about the 4th Industrial Revolution. We've talked about that as being the 4th rebellion. You can look at the phrasing, just change that to the 4th human rebellion, and that's coming. Now, in this second rebellion here that we're talking about, the angels knew that it was forbidden for them to marry, yet they still chose to leave their heavenly estate to be with earthly women and have children. So they knew that was wrong. So it was an act of rebellion. They weren't naive about this. They knew exactly that if they were to do what they wanted to do, it would be rebellion against God. Verses 4 to 6. So in fact, they knew the deed was so sinful. They actually knew that it was really, really bad what they were going to do, that their leader, Semjaza, who also goes by the name Samlazaz, that's the same one, Samlazaz, Semjaza, he made them swear an oath that all 200 of them would be mutually cursed, imprecated, together for what they were about to do. So he didn't want to take all the blame. He knew that what they were going to do was really wrong in God's eyes. So he swore an oath with the others there that they would all be bound and punished together for this. Now, verses 6 to 8, they talk there about the days of Jared is when they descended. So Jared, so from the time of Adam and Eve, there's a phrase called Anno Mundi, from the beginning of the world, from the creation of the world, I should say. Jared was born into the world 460 years in. Now, we actually know, so I was talking to you about those Enoch's prophecies, Enoch 93 and 91. We know that the angels didn't descend until after the first 700 years. So around 700 Anno Mundi, which was around 3304 BC. And that's kind of when they descended. So kind of right around here. So Jared's around, the days of Jared, but Enoch is already around as well. And Enoch, we're going to see in the book of Enoch, has a lot of contact with these fallen angels. But that's kind of when they fell, around 3304 BC, sometime past that. Now, the importance of Mount Hermon. So Mount Hermon is right here. And in the days of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, it would have been right on that northern portion there of the kingdom of Israel. That's Mount Hermon. So Mount Hermon was located in what would become northern Israel. Now, remember, this promised land wasn't really settled until after 15th century BC. Now, the name Hermon comes from the Semitic root herm, meaning taboo or forbidden place. And so that's what Hermon translates into, is the forbidden place. It actually had over 20 temples on its slopes dedicated to the Canaanite god Baal. So this is Canaanite territory right here. The Canaanites corrupted the tribe of Dan. So you can see there the tribe of Dan. There's a city named Dan, but if you look at the maps of how this whole area of Israel was split up, Dan was right at the base of Mount Hermon. And Dan was, of course, one of the original 12 tribes. But in the book of Revelation, the name Dan doesn't appear. It's replaced through Joseph's two sons. And so it's called, so Dan is not in Revelation. And there's a reason for that, is because the tribe of Dan became corrupted by the Canaanites. And like I was just saying, the Canaanites worship Baal, and right at the base of Mount Hermon, right around Mount Hermon. Now, in the Bible, you'll remember them talking about Caesarea Philippi, and this is in Matthew 16. So when Jesus came to the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So Caesarea Philippi is right there at the base of Mount Hermon. And it's actually next to what they call the gates of Hades, or the gates of hell. There's a cavern here that was actually told to be the gates of hell. And so they had these structures set up right in the area there at that time. And this led to a dark, seemingly bottomless cavern in the base of Mount Hermon. And it was the focal point for all sorts of pagan worship and human sacrifice. If you'll remember your Hebrew cosmology, they believed hell, Hades, to be at the center of the earth. And they'd actually have these tunnels that were connecting down to that area. And so it was believed that this tunnel served as a gate of hell. Now let's just look at that passage from Matthew 16. When Jesus came to the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they said, "Some say thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremias, or one of the prophets." He saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Barjona, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but by my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." So here's kind of the rock here without the temple in front of it, and that's the gates of Hades there. So it's sitting behind this one temple. But the Petra, the rock all behind it at the base of Mount Hermon, that's what Jesus is referring to, on this rock. So Jesus basically says to his disciples, "Whom do you say that I am?" And Peter answers correctly by the Holy Spirit that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So he gives Jesus his due reference. And this is kind of what we're supposed to recognize, is that we're supposed to give reverence to God. And because God said that he sent his son Jesus, we're supposed to reverence Jesus. To learn more about this passage, we talk about it a lot more in Revelation 1 Bible study. It's about an hour and 9 minutes into the study. So there's the link there. But we go over this passage in greater detail. The gates of Hades, aka a tunnel to the underworld, within the rock, the Petra, at the base of Mount Hermon, shall not prevail against the church. So in Revelation, Jesus is speaking to the overcomers, this church that Jesus is building. Now, when we look at gates, gates are considered defensive structures. Gates are not for offense, gates are for defense. And what Jesus is saying here is that the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church. So he's actually calling the church to take an offensive against hell, and hell will not prevail. This is what we're meant to understand by the keys. When we understand the authority, which what the keys represent, when believers start to understand the authority that God gives them, they can actually take the offensive against hell. So instead of being scared by what Mystery Babylon is threatening us with or doing to us, we have to kind of take the mindset that no, we're going to take the offensive against the gates of hell. We're going to go against the offensive against the enemy, trust in God, believe, recognize our authority. And this is what they mean when they also say the whole world waits for the manifestation of the sons of God, children of God. When we come to that place where we know our authority, we know what God has given us, we know the keys that we have, and when we start using them and believing them, that's when God's people will win. And we're not going to win by power, by strength. We win by his spirit is how we win. So when we have his spirit in us, that makes us undefeatable. And that's the mindset we need to have. That's the mindset that we're needing to come to in these last days. And so again, this passage here in Matthew is a reminder of that. But even this whole passage in Enoch kind of points to what's going on here. At Mount Hermon, this Petra, when Jesus was at Caesar Philippi talking to them, that kind of gives some of the background of what he's talking about, that he's talking about these gates of hell, and they will not prevail against strong believers, overcomers, I should say. As I was preparing the study, I actually just came across this. So Israel has conquered Mount Hermon. This was, I think, yesterday night or the night before. The highest mountain in Syria, its peak reaching 2814 meters. So Syria's capital, Damascus, is about 40 kilometers away. But what happened was there's the Israel side of Mount Hermon, and there's the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. And so just very, very recently, the state of Israel took over the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. For decades, Israel's northern defenses were overshadowed by Syria's Mount Hermon. No longer. The most important natural fortress in the region is now in the hands of Israel. So now Israel controls the whole mountain. Israel did it quietly, driving into Syria's abandoned positions and taking them without a fight. So basically, Syria withdrew, and they just moved right in. And again, a lot of this is important because when you understand what Mount Hermon is, this is the site of the fallen angels. This is where they came and descended onto the earth. You'll see the importance of this mountain. Now, interestingly, the United Nations just happens to have a base at the top of Mount Hermon. I don't want to get into it too much, but just kind of think about that. Why would the UN have a base on the top of Mount Hermon? The video will talk a little bit more about that, but it's just quite interesting that they have a base there. One other thing about Mount Hermon, Mystery Babylon often hides in plain sight. And so the Paramount logo with its 22 stars is said to represent the fallen angels, which we know are stars, descending on Mount Hermon. This was from, I think, a Facebook post. The logo of Paramount Pictures features 22 stars falling down from heaven and landing atop a mountain. In the book of Enoch, we read how 200 watchers, fallen angels, fell and landed on Mount Hermon, where they proceeded to make a pact to conspire against humanity and create abominations such as the Nephilim. The 22 leaders of this rebel group are also named. Thus, the elite, or who own Paramount, are showing us exactly who they serve. And so a lot of Mystery Babylon promotes their agenda, promotes their teachings through the media, including the movies. And so again, the fact that a movie studio has these 22 stars descending on a mountain really just shows you who they are, who they serve, what their purposes are. Here's a short clip of just whenever you go to a movie. I was actually at a movie lately and actually saw this exact same little footage here. So I'll just play it for you. When it starts, just watch how the stars descend. And it's really just telling you who they are. So again, just a reference to the Watchers and Mount Hermon there. So Enoch 6 to 8 actually lists the leader Semjaza, so he'd be one of the 22 stars. They list the 18 leaders of tens, which we just saw there earlier, so that's 18. And then right after that passage, there's three others named, basically Arachiel, Shamsiel, and Azazel. And that makes up the 22 stars. So these are the 22 that are named in that passage between Enoch 6 to 8. Azazel is very interesting, and we'll see that later. So we'll talk more about Azazel later on in our next study. Now, to get the 200 angels, we just add some Jazza, which would be one. The 18 leaders that are written in Enoch 6, those are 18 leaders of tens. So each of them will have 10 under them. So that makes 180. And then we add Azazel as well. And that comes up to 200 angels that descended on Mount Hermon. Now, here's some other Mystery Babylon movie production logos with their hidden symbols. So Paramount's one, but there's a few others actually as well. There's Columbia. And so Columbia has a statue of Ishtar, Semiramis Isis, and she's sitting atop the Mystery Babylon pyramid. So again, that's just something people don't realize every time they go watch the movie, but Mystery Babylon is controlling what you see. Universal Studios. So before every movie, they flash that ball Earth in front of you, and it's just part of the massive brainwashing that's going on to make you think that the Earth is a ball. And again, that's played before every movie for millions and millions of people every year, many times, multiple times a year, if you still go to movies. Disney, same thing. They mock you with that firmament. So that big thing that you see on top of there, they're telling you in right in plain sight that, hey, you are under a firmament. You got stars embedded within that firmament. And then the 666, they hide in Disney, the number of the beast. There's no reason for them to have the 666 in Disney, but they just play it there openly. There's a 6 there above the I. The Y is turned into a 6. And the Disney, the D part, is the 6 backwards. So again, 666 right there in Disney. Every time you see it, they're telling you who they work for in plain sight. And you have to decide whether or not you're going to believe what they tell you. Chapter 7. So the 200 angels each chose for himself a wife. Now, that word chose is a very nice neutral word, but Jasher 4, this is just another account of the fallen angels, actually. Its account is not as favorable. So let's read Jasher 4 here. And their judges and rulers, which is just the way of saying the leaders of the fallen angels, went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands, according to their choice. So actually, when you look at that word chose in Hebrew, it actually it actually means something much more than just choosing. It means choosing and taking, selecting, making their own. That's kind of what that word really means. And so that's what they're doing here in Jasher 4, where they describe it a bit more accurately. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, and it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted its ways upon earth, all men and all animals. And so what they're saying is I don't know how they do it, but they started mixing animals, whether it was by procreation, who knows, but they started mixing these species with one another. Humans with animals, animals with animals, and it was corrupting the whole earth. And this is why the situation had got so bad. And we'll talk about what God is going to do about it, but just know that the situation really was quite dire for the earth when God decided to do what he did. Now, we'll talk more about what they did with the animals later, so we'll get into that a bit more. But for now, just know that the fallen angels began having relations with the women. They taught them charms and enchantments, which are used to seduce. They taught them the various benefits of plants and how to propagate those plants. So they taught what the plants would do, different things, different effects they would have. Now, just as a note, these teachings themselves are not intrinsically evil. So it's not evil to do these things. It's not evil to know of these things. The problem is that what can happen if the wrong intention is behind it. So just like anything, a fork itself isn't a weapon, but someone can use it as a weapon if they have the wrong intent behind it. Um, Now, the problem is that these things were being taught to men ahead of schedule. So you don't teach like babies or toddlers things that adults are supposed to know. And that's kind of what was happening is these fallen angels, they called them the watchers because they were supposed to watch over men. They were supposed to help them, right? But to teach them these things way ahead of when they were ready for it, um, it just gave them tools to use that can further things that are in their heart. So if they had wrong intentions in their heart, they had access to these different tools to use. It just put them way ahead of schedule. Now, verse 3 there, the women became pregnant. So they become pregnant by the fallen angels. Now, some might ask how this can happen, but remember that angels can appear in any form. This is 2 Corinthians 11:14. No wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So this word disguise, it implies that he can appear in any form that he likes. A lot of times in Greek mythology, they compared Zeus to doing this. Zeus would come down to earth, he'd disguise himself as whatever, and he'd have relationships with women, right? And so, Satan is kind of said to have these same powers that he can disguise himself. So these fallen angels, very much the same way, they can come down in whatever form they want and have relationships with women. Now, the passage there, they bear great giants whose height was 3,000 ells. That's actually a little bit controversial for a couple of reasons. Oh, actually, before I get to that, there's actually this passage, Hebrews 13:2. Do not neglect hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. So angels, good angels, can also appear in human form, and you wouldn't know it. I believe I've encountered angels myself, but I've heard lots of stories as well of people having, dire situations or they were trouble on a deserted road or whatever, and an angel came down to visit, looked like a normal person. I've heard lots of those types of stories. So again, angels could appear to humans in different forms. We can chat about that later in the Q&A. Now, the first controversy about these giants being 3,000 ells, first of all, did giants actually exist? So that first question there, we covered this more extensively in our Nephilim Bible study, True World History of the Nephilim. There's a link there. But giant skeletons have been found throughout the world. So all over the world, there's been these giant skeletons across various civilizations. There's actually a very high concentration around Crete, in an area called the Land of the Giants. And again, we know Greek, Samaria, Egypt, they had a lot of this, what they call mythology, but they had a lot of these in their history and their culture about these creatures. Now, just one little clarification. The word Nephilim means fallen ones, and it references the offspring of the angels and not the angels themselves. Now, one of the reasons they're fallen is they can't be redeemed. They were not from heaven. They were made on the earth. And so they don't go back up to heaven when they die. And that'll have implications we'll talk about later on. But that's what Nephilim means, the fallen ones. Some people have classified them as the earthborn, which is another way to kind of say things. But the word neph there means to fall, the root. And so fallen ones is what Nephilim means. So it's not the angels themselves, it's their offspring. Now, these are documented in the historical record. These are actual documentations of skeletons that have been found, and it's been noted. So they're just a few. There's many, many, many more, but these ones are on record as having been discovered. You can kind of read this in detail, where they've been discovered, what time frame they've been discovered. But these were real, actual finds, and no one denies it. It's just that they don't talk about it. Modern history, Mystery Babylon doesn't talk about these, because what happens is if they did talk about them, it would instantly discredit their theory of evolution, and it would confirm the biblical account is indeed correct. So it's good to know that these things exist, that they're around, because if you know they exist, it just really discredits what Mystery Babylon is trying to tell you. Some of these skeletons have been as large as 36 feet. These are just some pictures of people finding, giant femur in this case. This is just some workers finding ancient discovery here, some skeletons. Here's a gentleman, and these are not doctored photos. These photos were long before the internet. They're older finds, and they're not doctored. They're not AI made. These were there. I seen these a long time ago myself. So these are just finds of giant skeletons. This one's particularly large. This one here is actually from a Sumerian tablet, and these are normal-sized men, and this is their king or leader. It's actually felt to be Gilgamesh, and you can see how large he is there compared to them. This is actually another statue of Gilgamesh. I showed you this one before, but if you can imagine that's a full-size lion, this goes to show you how giant Gilgamesh is. And we've talked about Gilgamesh being discovered. It's the reason they cited weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when there was none. It was all basically just a ploy to get into Iraq. They recently found Gilgamesh's tomb. This was in 2003. And the first place the soldiers went when they landed in Baghdad was straight to the Baghdad Museum. They said that there were looters at the museum. There's no such thing. There was no broken locks. There was an inside job. Someone let the soldiers in, take what they wanted, but they blamed it on looters. And again, I will tell you that does have some implications going forward. The elites of this world are basically trying to find immortality without God, and finding this body of Gilgamesh, some of the tablets that were around him, some of the information that was around him. I do believe that it's all important for them. There's actually documentation of Hillary Clinton, someone asking about the whereabouts of Gilgamesh's tomb and his remains, and some other information there. So again, this is a real thing. This is what's going on behind the scenes in this world. These are some pictures of giants from 1700s, 1800s. So you can see these guys were quite large. I think his name was Hugo. This gentleman, again, normal sized men there. He's quite large compared to them. Another one, he's, I'm not sure, 8 feet there maybe. Quite tall though. This is Chang. He's from China. Again, quite large. This is what they call the skeleton of Peru. So if you go to Peru, the giant of Peru, sorry, I should say, and this is in their museum, they reassembled the structure to be upright, and they showed how large he is. This is a drawing of men when they first came to North America, dealing with some of the people they encountered, and they were giant. They were giant in those days. There's newspaper articles, there's tons, and we talk about this in our True World History, the Nephilim, in that Bible study. So I just kind of took some pictures from there, but basically, giant skeleton found, 18 feet tall, tons of newspaper headlines. Couple things just about this, just a quick summary is First Nations people, they used to extend their hand, and we do that today to say hi, but they actually did it and they'd say how, and the reason was they'd extend their hand to show five fingers, whereas these Nephilims were known to have 6 fingers. And when you're looking at someone from a distance, you can't really tell the height because of the perspective, but when they showed their hand, you can see if they had 5 or 6 fingers. A lot of these burial mounds are told not to be disrupted. They do have giants in them. There's also areas they close off, national parks and things like that, where they don't let people have access to. And again, they're limiting the access to these things. Early on, when people were first settling, they'd actually find tons of these skeletons. They'd call up the Smithsonian. Smithsonian would come by, take away what they found, and you never hear from it again. But there are lots of these newspaper articles telling the local population of the finds. And again, this is all suppressed information. They want to suppress giants because they want to push evolution and that we come from monkeys. This is the story of the giant of Kandahar. Again, we talk about more in the Nephilim video, but in Afghanistan, can't quite remember the years, early 2000s, but they did encounter a giant when they were exploring kind of further off the beaten path. He attacked and killed one of their squad. They retaliated, and it was quite the firefight. The guy was pretty resistant to bullets overall. Eventually, he succumbed, but they captured him. They actually carted him off in a plane to the U.S. somewhere, and or who knows where. But that was an encounter they talk about, and you can Just read The Giant of Kandahar, Afghanistan. You won't find it on sites like Google or YouTube, but if you go to like a BitChute or Rumble, you might be able to find out more about that. Here's some scripture just confirming the existence of giants. Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. This is from Amos 2:9. Yet destroyed I the Amorite before them. The Amorite were a race of giants, whose height was like the height of the cedars. And the cedars there were about 40 to 70 feet. And he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above and his roots from beneath. So again, this is just confirming giants of 40 to 70 feet. This is from Numbers 13, 32 to 33. This is when Joshua and Caleb were sent out to spy along with 10 others on the Canaanites, I believe, or sorry, on the sons of Anak. So they brought a bad report of the land which they had spied out to the sons of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants. So they were seeing these giants devouring their inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are people of great stature, very large. We also saw the Nephilim there. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight. So they were like grasshoppers compared to these giants. And again, that's the Bible speaking of these giants. This is from 1 Samuel chapter 17. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Now, a cubit is 18 inches. It's basically the length from the elbow to the tip of the fingers, the forearm, basically. So 6 of those plus 9 inches, which is a span. A span is basically from the tip of the thumb to the tip of the pinky when you stretch out your hand. And that's about 9 inches, so about half of a cubit. And so in total, that is 117 inches, which is 9 feet, 9 inches. So that was the height of Goliath. If you think these basketball players are pretty big, he's way bigger than those guys. So 9 feet, 9 inches. Deuteronomy 3:11. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. Is it not in Rabath of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. So again, a man's forearm is a cubit, 18 inches. Goliath's brother, Og, king of Bashan, would have been around 9 cubits, which is 9 times 18. And that works out to 13 feet, 6 inches. So Og of king of Bashan was huge. If you'll remember, David, when he went to go fight Goliath, he took out 5 stones. He only used 1 stone to slay Goliath. The 4 stones were actually meant for Goliath's brothers, including Og, king of Bashan. So that's what God had called him to do. Let's see here. Secondly, how big did the giants get? So an ell is essentially the same as a cubit, which is 18 inches. 3,000 ells would be 54,000 inches, or 3,750 feet. Now, not only would this height be unsustainable, but there is no evidence of anything this large on the earth, any human skeletons or remains that large. Now, in the Lawrence translation, it's actually rendered as 300 ells, so about 1/10 of, which works out to only 375 feet, but still that's quite overly large. So this explanation here, they bear great giants whose height was 3,000 ells. There are 2 other possible explanations of what that means. Now, one explanation, some theorize that 3,000 ells or 300 ells were derived from a copyist error, and it should actually only be about 30 ells. 30 ells would be about 45 feet. As I showed you, they did find one skeleton 36 feet. That would also correspond to what Amos said about the heights of cedars, which were 40 to 70 feet. So again, it's possible that it was just a copyist error, should have been 30 ells, and maybe that's what it meant. The other possibility, and this is kind of the one more I ascribe to, is there's an 1839 translation that translates Enoch 7:3 differently. There's a guy named John Beatty, and what he says is this is how he translates it. So instead of, and they bare giants whose height was 3,000 ells, how he translated it was, and there were born unto them three sorts, three kinds. The first were the great giants, and to the giants were born Nephilim, and to the Nephilim were born Eliud. So that word ells becomes Eliud. Now, this is R.H. Charles writing this later, and this is on him translating the book of Jubilees, actually. I'll just read this out. So this is Noah speaking to his sons. For owing to these three things came the flood upon the earth, namely owing to the fornication, wherein the watchers against the law of their ordinances went a whoring after the daughters of men, and took themselves wives of all which they chose, and they made the beginning of uncleanness. And they begat sons, the Nephidim, kind of like the Nephilim, and they were all unlike, and they devoured one another. And the giant slew the Naphiel, and the Naphiel slew the Eljo, and the Eljo mankind, and one another. So Eljo, Eliud, what that's referring to, actually, I'll talk about it here. So the Watchers, the fallen angels, they had the women bore great giants, which were very large in size, and they're basically half angel, half human. They bore Nephilim, which were less than 50% angel, and they were smaller in size. So as you'll notice, the giants got smaller and smaller in size progressively because they had less of the angel DNA or whatever made the angels reproduce. And then the Eliud are another type of creation, and they were animal-human hybrids. And I shouldn't say creation, I should say distortion of creation. So the Eliud with these animal-human hybrids, which we'll talk about in a second, we should really reconsider what we've been told is mythology. The Greeks, they had their culture believed in the Titans, which were the fathers or the parents of the Olympians. These were the Olympian gods that had superhuman strength and powers. Their pantheon of gods that lived on Mount Olympus. So their enemies were the Titans. And then also in Greek mythology, quotes, there's all these various human-animal hybrids. And so when we consider the book of Enoch, what we hear about Greek culture and tradition, should we really call that mythology, or were these things real at one point? And if you remember, Greek is right beside Crete, so they would have firsthand knowledge of these different types of creatures. This is from a book called The Book of the Giants. It actually has a lot of similar themes as the Book of Enoch, actually. And this is from chapter 3 of that book. The giants imitate the sins of their fathers and take for themselves wives and animal mates, and they begat Nephiel and Elio. So when the Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers, take wives, they begat other Nephilim. So Nephilim is sometimes a word, or Nephiel, I should say here, would be the descendant of a Nephilim. So this half human angel hybrid has a child. They call that a Nephiel. Now, we've kind of taken it where the Nephilim just captures any sort of animal angel hybrid. But at that time, what they're saying in the translation is that there were three different subsets of these Nephilim. There were the angels directly with humans. There's the offspring of that mating with humans. And then there's the Elio, which are these kind of hybrids between those and animals. And they called that the Elio, Eliud. That's hybrids, basically. Now, God, seeing all this wickedness, sends Enoch to declare to Shemyaza, the leader of the Watchers, that they will soon be punished for causing the earth to be corrupted. So if you can imagine, there's all these different hybrids now, whatever form, there are all these hybrids, and so they basically corrupted the earth. We'll talk about this much later, but this was Satan's plan to prevent Jesus from being born. So, they had the prophecy in Genesis of the woman, the seed of the woman versus the seed of the serpent. And what Satan wanted to do was, if he could corrupt the bloodline of the woman, he could prevent Jesus, who was going to be could lead to his destruction. He could prevent him from being born. And this is why they had to corrupt the entire genetic pool so that Jesus would never be born. And we'll get into that later when we talk about Noah, but we'll just kind of give you a preview of that. This is from the book of Jasher, chapter 61. Zepho, he's within the Hebrews there. And it was one day that Zepho lost a young heifer, and he went to seek it, and he heard it lowing around about the mountain. And Zepho went, and he saw, and behold, there was a large cave at the bottom of the mountain, and there was a great stone there at the entrance of the cave. And Zepho split the stone, and he came into the cave, and he looked, and behold, a large animal was devouring the ox. From the middle upward, it resembled a man, and from the middle downward, it resembled an animal. And Zepho rose up against the animal and slew it with his swords. So again, he's seeing a hybrid there, and this is from the book of Jasher. So we see here the historical documentation of hybrid human-animal creatures as well. And again, there's many Greek and Egyptian examples of these. These are just some of the ones from ancient Greece. So there's the Gorgon, like the Medusa. There's the Dryad. There's the Manticore, lion, scorpion, human. So actually, they start mixing different things altogether. The Minotaur, you're aware of, the bull and the human. The Harpy, a bird and a human. The Centaur, lower horse half, upper human half. There's the Sirens, half fish, half human. The Sphinx. There's the Satyr, which is half human, half goat. And so again, were these creatures really existing? Are they purely made up and mythological, or is there a historical basis for them? And the book of Enoch would show that there probably is a historical basis for them. And again, this is what they call the Eliud. I've read somewhere else that the Eliud, they consider the monsters, the monstrosities, things that are just completely abnormal, all right? And that's what these things would be considered as monstrous. Let's go over to the Egyptian side. They had the Sphinx. So you can imagine the Sphinx on all fours with a human face. So again, a hybrid. They had a lot of these in their hieroglyphics. So human bottoms and animal tops. They had carvings of them as well. This is looks like a half cheetah, half human. Here's another one, half bird, half wolf or dog. Their Egyptian gods, some of them, like Ra, was considered half bird, I believe. Another one, Horus, and another one, Anubis. So with all this talk of giants and hybrids, there's suspicion that the same thing is happening today. I saw this picture like 20 years ago, and it's a mouse with a human ear on the back of it. So they're already splicing human genomes at that time. There's something called CRISPR-Cas9, which is a gene editing tool. So they actually have the ability to edit genes now. They can take different genes and splice them together. I showed this photo before in one of our talks. Basically, and this is video footage, so this isn't some sort of still that's been doctored with. You can actually watch the video of these giant ISIS fighters. ISIS is really CIA, and they actually use these kind of genetic creations there. These things are said to be cold or heartless. They saw a bunch of these shooting up buses when people were feeding Aleppo. This was like around 2014, I believe. These creatures, or whatever they are, were shooting up at buses without any remorse. They were cold, very evil. Again, you would think they could be hybrid. These are normal-sized Egyptian Coptic Christians here. And just recently, they actually had a monkey-human hybrid that they're growing in labs in China. So they said they destroyed them, apparently, but if this research is going on, this hybridization thing is happening. And there is one quote from the book of Matthew 24:37. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. So when Jesus comes back, these hybrids, these giants that existed in Noah's day are going to be prominent again. And again, this verse doesn't make sense unless you know the book of Enoch. So I believe the best way to interpret Enoch 7:3 is as per John Beatty, with a description of the three types of watcher offspring. So the great giants, the Nephilim, and then the hybrids, the animal-human hybrids. And the giants of undefined size, though other passages describe them like cedars, they're probably around 40 feet at most, which is supported by the archaeological evidence. So again, many of these finds show skeletons up to around that ballpark. Now, as we've read previously, men could no longer feed them, and so the giants turned against them and devoured them. This reminds me of one of my favorite NDE accounts. If you ever get a chance, I think I've mentioned this before, but this is a near-death experience described by Jeremy's mother. But it's very interesting. You know, when in there, one of the things in there is about how demons would come to the earth and basically devour. And this whole talk about, Nephilim devouring just kind of brought that to mind. There's also, just a side note, there's a great book on near-death experiences by John Burke called Imagine Heaven. And again, just a reminder, these things I believe are God letting people witness to what they've seen and just giving us a little bit of a glimpse of what's to come and to build up our faith is really what these are all about. Be careful because there are a lot of these false NDEs out there as well. But this one's a very genuine one, full of lots of genuine, biblically kind of correct and consistent near-death experiences. So verse 5, they sin against the birds, the beasts, the reptiles, and the fish. As seen elsewhere, this means they created the hybrids. And somehow this must have been an option for them. For me, the way I sort of, believe this happened is they could procreate, or somehow they were just able to, because of their fallen angel nature, they were able to replicate with these things. Again, hard to say for sure how. Verse 6, they started to devour one another's flesh and started drinking the blood. Now, this brings up the idea of vampirism and other things that happen behind the scenes. Suffice to say, what the Watchers did in their transgression is to bring lots of evil upon the earth. So when the fallen angels decided to disobey God, decided to not follow the order of things, rebel, they brought lots of evil upon the earth. The earth starts bringing accusation against these lawless ones. So the Watchers, the great giants, the Nephilim, and we'll see in future chapters God pronouncing his judgment for this. And just as a glimpse of it, Jude talks about in the New Testament, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. So we'll get that more into the next study, but that's the end of this one.